great pleasure to introduce Keith Humphreys, who has real estate experience of many, well, some decades in Southeast Asia. And we haven't been able to stump him yet with any question. So without further ado, Keith.
Morning, everybody. Can you hear me in the back? No. Two hands up. Is that better? Can. Okay. Well, very interesting to be here. I see a lot of familiar faces, a lot of our old clients and current clients. What I'd like to... I can talk to myself.
Lovely face.
Thank you. Okay, I'd like to just, well, when this room. I'd like to just run through a couple of areas about the Chiang Mai market this morning, and then I'm happy to take some questions at the end. Basically, I will start with an overview of the market, an explanation of why it's unique, some indication of what's been happening in the last 6 or 8 months since COVID started. Maybe of interest to a lot of the audience is some of the issues that we as an agency see that foreign owners, foreign buyers, foreign tenants, and... Hello? Is that better? Close. Is that better? Okay, good, good. Okay. Yeah, some issues and problems that we often see that foreigners have as tenants, buyers, and owners here. A little bit about the prognosis for the market from an objective point of view, not just an agent's point of view, and then some final thoughts. Now, I know, as I said, there's a number of our clients here already, but I'd just like to run through a little bit about Perfect Homes and our history, because we believe that we are the leading agency in Chiang Mai, and I think we back that up for a couple of reasons. We have a very strong reputation in the market, and we actually thrive on recommendations, referrals, and people introducing happy clients to us. You can go to our website and you'll see that we've got over 600 strong, positive recommendations. We've built Perfect Homes into a brand rather than just a name. We've been established about 10 years, and we have over 25 staff in our office in Faham. We made a decision to keep a lot of the business lines in-house, such as our video production, our photography, our administration, rather than just outsource them. We'd like to think that we are recognized for our professionalism and integrity. Personally, I come from a real estate background that has an international qualification, which the English people here will know RICS. The Americans might know me as a fee appraiser. But it's a worldwide recognized qualification. I don't want to give my age away, but we're a management team that has over 65 years of experience. And as David mentioned, I've actually been in Asia for, I don't like to say this, but many decades. We have experience across Asia Pacific. I've also worked in the UK, Australia, and the US. One of our key strengths is our marketing. We actually focus on 3 core markets. One is the Thai market, which is the biggest market in Chiang Mai. Secondly is the English-speaking market, which embraces our European allies, our European friends, and some of the people, say, from Hong Kong or Singapore. We also cover, naturally, the Chinese market, which is actually, until the commencement of COVID, was probably the biggest growth market in Asia. I think you may know Simon. He was the founder of the company. A lot of you will have dealt with him previously. Rumkip, his wife, who is also a co-founder. Paul, who I know some of you are dealing with on sales at the moment. Paul's been with us about 5 or 6 years. And then there's me, and I probably should have that photoshopped, I think, because even though I've been in Asia about 40 years, I'm still only 29, and I haven't quite worked that one out. But anyway, that's that. Okay, enough about Perfect Homes. Let's have a look at some of the issues that we see in this market. I don't want to preach to the converted, but everybody knows that markets are cyclical. This market tends to work in cycles of roughly 6 or 7 years. I first came here in about 2012, and the market was really on its knees. 2010, 2011 here, very poor across the board. Tourism was weak, condos were old and stale, and then we saw a bit of a renaissance, 2012, 2013, right the way through to 2014. This market actually peaked in early 2018. So notwithstanding what's been happening in the last 9 months, we saw signs in late 17 and early 18 that the market had peaked. Land values were so high that you couldn't really do development. There were new condos coming up everywhere you looked, and there were housing estates or move-ins all over the city. We tend to refer this to COVID as a black swan event, and I think everybody knows what black swan means, but it's really to do with a major world event, such as the global financial crisis 2008, the SARS, the MERS, incidents that impact the market suddenly and sharply. We think this one is different, of course, because we don't know when the end is in sight. But I'll talk a little bit more about the market and the impact shortly. So, what drives the market here? Now, we're all expats, we all think the centre of the universe is around us, but actually the market is predominantly and totally a Thai market. The buyers are Thai, the majority of the money here is Thai. It's just particularly with an agent like us, when we first started, we thought that the foreign market was the market, was the only market to be in. And we learned very quickly that it's just a fraction of the total market. Thais from Bangkok, out of province, looking to buy here. They have some affinity with Chiang Mai. Maybe they're from Chiang Mai originally, been in Bangkok for their career, they want to come back. It's fundamentally a Thai-driven market. International retirees, which I guess applies to a lot of people here. Very, very interesting that the demographics of retirees has changed dramatically in the last 6 or 7 years. Our client base comes from all over the world. We see people from North America, South America, Middle East, Cuba, Spain, whatever. One key factor is that 7 or 8 years ago, maybe 9 years ago, there were a lot of foreign couples coming out of Europe into Chiang Mai. We just don't see that. In the last couple of years, it has really dried up. A lot of single people, single women, single men coming. European couples, Caucasian couples, very, very few. We've also seen that a lot of people come here for shorter terms. Instead of being here for 1 year or staying the whole year, they come and go. They've got homes elsewhere, or they may want to get away for the smoky season or the hot season, whatever. So the demographics and the time that people stay here has changed dramatically. We have what I call relocators, which is slightly different than retirees. Obviously, the primary markets are China. People relocate from China. They want to get out for different reasons. Better education for the kids, better living environment, the general wish to get away from the country. Hong Kong, with its recent issues, a big spike in people wanting to get away, relocate. Chiang Mai is on the doorstep. A lot of people in the older days would have gone to Australia or Vancouver or somewhere in the US. Chiang Mai offers a great alternative for people, from Hong Kong particularly. But sometimes it's a stepping stone. They're here a couple of years and then they're off to somewhere else as the visa comes through or they decide that Chiang Mai isn't quite what they want. Digital nomads is an interesting one because that spike in numbers of people was already falling a little bit pre-COVID. Let's say in 2018, 2019, we had digital nomads coming out of our areas basically. Typically they get a group of them, 4 or 5, rent a luxury house, work online, spend their time on the pool, maybe working on European or US time. But that has dropped off, partly I think because there are alternatives in Asia now. You can go to Malaysia, you can go to Vietnam, and Chiang Mai has a limited shelf life for some of these people. Business people. There are still business people coming here. We find there's quite a number of digital software companies, for example, from Finland or Norway, who can work here at a much cheaper cost. They can send the product back to the home country. That can be worked on during the day and then sent back here for the night. So basically, you've got 24-hour working for people working in the software industry. We also have people designing manufacturing here, children's clothes, sales for the Australian boating market. Educational visas, visitors I should say, people coming to learn Thai here with a one-year visa, people coming here to study at Chiang Mai U for postgrad courses, and medical tourists. Obviously it's something that Thailand particularly now is looking very hard at, to how to boost the better quality tourist, how to bring in more medical tourists because they can come here, have the medical treatment, recuperate, have a vacation, and spend more money. One point I haven't got on here is the fact there's a lot of people come here for meditation, retreat, get away from life stresses. They come for rehabilitation, mental rehabilitation, and physical rehabilitation. So these are the sort of people coming generally who are driving demand in the market. And when I say demand, that is for sales, for purchases, renting, short and long term. Okay, as David kindly said before, I've worked in many different countries around Asia. Markets are challenging generally, but this is believe me, one of the most unique, challenging markets. It's quite distinct in many ways from the other markets in Thailand. It's totally different from Phuket. Phuket, for example, you've got a lot of high net worth individuals, both from outside of Asia and within Asia, coming for the yachting, coming for the beaches, coming to buy the luxury villas. Pattaya and Hua Hin, again, quite distinct to Chiang Mai because they're accessible from Bangkok, and again, they're predominantly Thai-based, Thai demand-driven markets. You can drive to your weekend retreat in Pattaya or Hua Hin. You can't do that in Chiang Mai if you're living in Bangkok, unless you like a long drive. You don't need to tell me that the city has different appeal factors. Obviously, you don't have beaches and sea, and therefore we attract a different clientele. We've got the nature, we've got the mountains, we've got the walks. The demographics here are quite distinct in terms of nationalities. We don't see the huge numbers of Scandinavians, for example, that we see in Hua Hin. We don't see the huge number of Russians that we see in Pattaya. We don't see the real mass Chinese tourism that we see in those destinations. Yes, we have Chinese tourism and lots of people from China, but it's not on the same scale. We actually also have a lot of people who sort of come, test the waters, as it were, go to Phuket, and decide they don't like Phuket and come back. A challenge for us, particularly as an agent, is that 90% of our clients, when they first come here to buy or rent, they don't live in the city. Basically, that prolongs the period of decision making. It's not that everybody, 90% of all buyers are outside the city, but certainly our clients, if they're looking to buy a condo, they're probably overseas, or they need to come here 3 times before they're convinced that this is the place to buy. Some issues we face, and certainly a lot of our clients here face, lack of reliable database of transactions. Nobody knows what was sold yesterday, nobody knows what was sold last week, nobody knows the real prices. Don't ask land office, they won't help. So there's a lot of guesswork in the market, and that doesn't help anybody here, it doesn't help us when clients expect us to know what happened in Sansai yesterday or Handong the day before. We know the market very well. but there's no reliable database to compare. If in the US or Australia, you can pull it all online, you can see the land price, the house price, the condo price, you can see when it was sold, when it was on the market. Forget it. That doesn't happen. Therefore, it's an extremely opaque market. We do know, like I said, asking prices, but asking prices don't have any relationship to the final figure here. People, of course, are very concerned about delivering the final figure to the land office because therefore it has a taxation implication. May be applicable to some people here, I don't know. We're always quite astonished at the number of people who come here and make decisions on real estate. Renters rent without a lease agreement. Oh, I know him, he's a very nice guy, it's no problem. Oh, I couldn't read it, it was in time. I didn't know I had to repair this and I'll never get my deposit back. People, believe it or not, they do it. It's just something that you wouldn't do in your home country, so why do you do it here? But people do. Buyers, even worse. At least with renters, you can get out of your contract, maybe, worst come to worst, you walk away, you lose your 2 months deposit. Worst come to worst, you stay for your 6 months or 12 months and relocate. Buyers who get into difficulties is just amazes us. Don't check access. Don't check if there's an incumbents on the title deed. Try to do it without a lawyer. Try to find out, learn subsequently that the tests of Ban don't allow him to build this type of property. I have a client who bought land on the river. He didn't know that he couldn't build a house. So he's ended up with building a sala, a little 3 square meter sala. He didn't check. It's quite amazing to us as agents. A common one. People arrive from Beijing or Seattle, well, somewhere in the US and say, well, you know, my God, that's cheap. If I was buying in Singapore, it must be worth 5 times the price. Or I've just sold my home for $1 million in my city. That's really cheap. And subsequently, they find that it's not cheap because the market here is very finite, is very limited, and people check the prices. So if you come here in 2 weeks, you bought a house for 30 million without an agent, without a lawyer, we have sympathy, but we just wonder why people do it. And probably my favorite of all of the things that I see people do, which is wrong. Maybe you've got experience in your home country, maybe you've done something in Phuket or Pattaya. You buy land, 4 million. You build a house, 6 million. You put it to the market for 30 million. If anyone's ever done development, you will know that gross margins are around 30%. Net margins may be below 20. People seriously try to sell their homes, so they acquired the land, built it for 30, 40 million, and they wonder why they don't sell. It's just, anyway. Okay, some do's and don'ts for first-time renters. And at the end of this, I'm happy to take any questions or any queries that you may have. And also, we have a couple of our ladies at the back here who are more than happy to discuss. But do's and don'ts for first-time renters. I think I have to say that you really should always work through a reputable agent. There's a lot of people in Chiang Mai who think they're agents. On the corner of my soy, the Somtam lady, she'll sell me land or she'll rent me a condo if I want. There's people who have no experience, or people who are here for short. Oh, I can make 15,000 on a quick rental, and I'm disappearing. So you really need a reliable agent. You really need to take your time. You may be pressured by the agent you're working with. You may feel that if I don't take it today, it will go. It will have gone. But there's always something else available. Please read the leases. If you can't read Thai, get someone to look at you, rely upon to look at it through you. The common causes, common big issues I see in leases is that my landlord won't do the repairs that I thought he was going to do. Why won't he do them? Well, the lease says that you're responsible. Secondly, deposits. My landlord won't give the deposit back. He said I'd trash the place. Did you get photographs when you moved in? No. Whose word is it? Who's right here? So, do's and don'ts. Use a good agent. Make sure your documentation, use at least read it even if you don't understand it all. And if in doubt, please use a lawyer. Condo ownership is fairly straightforward, but again, people tend to buy condos without doing any due diligence. And the due diligence that's important here is what are the status about the management? Does it have money in the kitty for repairs, renovations? Are there management fees and arrears? Obviously, things like the 49% ownership, you've got to check because you've got to get the letter from the juristic to say that if you're buying a condo, it's within the 49% foreign ownership. The pros of owning a condo, of course, it's yours and yours for life. A lot of people buy here, like I said earlier, lock them up, go away for 6 months, come back, knowing that it's still there. I've put owning a house in inverted commas here, and I'm not really going to discuss the ownership of land or house. It's really something that if you are interested and you haven't got a Thai spouse or partner, you really should be talking to a lawyer. But just a bit of confusion that always arises. A lease, usufruct and superficies are three different things. Some you can pass on to your heirs, you can let people inherit them, and some you cannot. Now, to some people that's not important, but it's a very major point. We see a lot of instances where a foreigner has a lease or a usufruct or superficie, believing that they can pass it on to their heirs. And in some cases, sorry, once that lease is finished or once that usufruct is finished, you've got nothing, and there's no comeback. So it's a little bit, again, like saying, there's a Latin expression which a lot of you people know, which is caveat emptor, which basically means let the buyer beware. And that I would put in capital letters in Chiang Mai, with a big C and a big E, caveat emptor. So, what's been happening since March, April? March, April, the date is really when COVID started to impact the market. It's actually very difficult to generalize about any market, particularly Chiang Mai, because we have different subsets. We have Niman, we have Central Festival area, we have downtown around sort of Shangri-La, and then we have the outlying regions where people like to live in Mei Rim, San Sai, Doi Saket, Handong, Nam Phra, perhaps a little bit closer to the city in Ban Wang Town, for example. But generally, new condo prices are really under pressure. And by new condos, it amazes me, it still amazes me here, just for example, in Niman, you have Nimana, you have Pune, and Hillside 3. Now, I don't know who's familiar with those and who's not. 3 condos within 200 meters of each other. The pricing goes something like Nimana, 90,000, Pune, 60,000, Hillside 3, 30,000. Same location, different age. It's a vagary of this market perhaps, but the point here is new condos, Nimana, anything around Central Festival, Astra particularly, but prices are seriously under pressure. A lot of those blocks were bought by offshore buyers for, shall I be polite, speculation, sorry, investment, I mean, for investment. You know, they were hoping to live in them for a couple of months, put a tenant in, use them for Airbnb. So those 3 areas are really suffering. We've got 20–25% price reduction from the peak, and I don't mean from the beginning of COVID. I mean from the peak of the market back in, as I said earlier, 2018. Astra, 80,000 baht a square meter down from 110. The condo around Central Festival was seeing 15% off the sort of 65,000. But if you're like me and prefer older condos, surprisingly they've held very well. We've successfully sold condos in Doi Ping, in Rimping, and some of the favoured what I call expat blocks. Prices have come off slightly, but not as much as the new ones. I tend to think that that's because the locations of the older blocks are better and more favoured in the city. That is, if you're on Chiang Mai, or if you're on Chiang Klan, or even Hillside 3. You've got good quality locations and the prices really haven't moved too much. Pre-owned homes below 10 million have been very high demand, and of course that's mainly for the Thai market. And one of the key factors for that is because they get mortgages. The banks are more than happy to give very favourable terms on mortgages. Mortgage holidays, as we all know, for properties for people who already have mortgages. So there's been very strong demand and a very active sales market for condo houses below 10 million, more around the 6 or 7 or 8 million than 10. Second part of this is that suddenly, out of the blue, we've got very strong demand for homes above 20 million. Typically in this market, it's a very thin market. There's very few people willing to buy homes above 20 million. If you do have that sort of money, people prefer to buy the land and build their own dream home. But the last couple of months, there's been a big increase in demand from mainly Thais, frankly, for properties over 20 million. Not surprisingly, the developers who've got all the boom mountains everywhere you can look are giving very attractive discounts on prices. They're giving value adds, they're giving you furniture, they're giving you extras that they wouldn't have given before, and they're giving favourable terms on financing. The rental market, I'm being fairly general here, but the rental market across the board was suffering because there's not many new tenants. There's definite activity. Some owners are prepared to be reasonable and discount rents. Some owners are holding because there's no real pressure on a lot of owners to rent or to sell. Without the foreigners coming into the city, there's very few tenants. It's just a question of a merry-go-round, people moving from this one to save a few thousand, or this one to this one because they want more space, because they don't want to be confined to the home anymore. Land buying activity is very subdued, as you'd expect. Most Thais would look at land for what I call a commodity. They would buy it with the expectation it would go up with a view to selling it in 5 years. They're not in the market. People looking to buy land for development are waiting for prices to drop further because, like I said at the very beginning, a lot of prices of land went up so quickly that the development was uneconomic. Sadly, retail activity is almost non-existent, although I do see in the last week or so there's a few little bars and restaurants opened up around Tampa Gate, for example. But if you drive around there, you drive around Neiman, the shops are boarded up, Hai Chow, and for rent. And the hotel and guest house market is a very long road to recovery. It's quite a concern to us that there's so many, pre-COVID there were so many new hotels coming through that we couldn't see where the people were coming from to fill them, basically. Just a little bit of a recap, because I said some of this before, but who's active in the market? Thais taking advantage of cheap mortgages. High net worth Thais from Bangkok. Yeah, it's interesting that some of those people are now retirement age, they've had successful careers, they're coming back, they want to buy 20, 30, 40 million. And surprisingly, even though I said earlier it's a thin market, there are not many properties that suit their requirements. So for us it's interesting, we just can't find the properties. A number of foreigners are buying for yield here. And by that I mean that in a reasonable condo, if you're buying as investment, you can get somewhere between 5 to 7%. 7% tends to be for the older properties, 20, 25 years ago. The 5% maybe the more modern ones. But as COVID took mid-May, mid-June, there's a lot of foreigners who already are established here see that the yield on those properties is far more attractive than any bank rate. A lot of Hong Kong buyers. I alluded before to the reason for that, but Hong Kong buyers actually buy without being here. We at Perfect Homes, we have a 360 virtual tour for a lot of our properties, which enables you, I'm sure you're familiar, to go forward and backward, look around, look at the environment, and people are actually buying without actually being here. Chinese families relocating, they tend to use, maybe tend not to buy without seeing the property, but what they do have is they have friends and relatives who've already established a beachhead here who will look at the property for them, do a video tour, and then make a decision. The attraction, lifestyle, the attraction in the city, south of the city, Nang Prai, Hang Dong, 80–90% of all the Chinese buyers here will go to that location because of the schools. They tip their families. Chinese retirees and other immigrants, people who still are working maybe with factories in Guangzhou or Kunming, keep their businesses, come here, settle down with a view to come here long term. There's a bit of a myth in the market about Chinese high net worth individuals. If you really are high net worth, you'll buy in London, you'll buy in Sydney, you'll buy in LA, whatever. But there are some buyers, the odd buyer, occasionally pops up for something that's 40, 45 million, but the myth in the market was that we were going to be swamped by people buying at that range. We're not. It's sub 10 million typically. And very interesting to me, to us, is that we are now up at about 30 or 40 people on our list waiting to get here. It's from all over the world. You name a country, we've got people waiting to come back. To come here for the first time. There's also, interestingly, a lot of foreigners with Thai wives who live in Denmark or in Korea who are also coming back or planning to come back when we can get back. Okay, the prognosis, I'm trying to be objective, not just talk like an agent, because it's easy to get carried away, but we've been through cycles, as I said earlier, we'll go through them again. We think 2021 will be a market characterized by demand, new demand into the market, people coming back, people realizing that things aren't quite as bad on the property scene as they were, and if we have hit the trough, then where are we going? We're ways up. So, summary, consolidation, reinstigation of momentum into the Chiang Mai market for 2021, we hope. Just like to leave you with two thoughts, which is probably will sound defensive, but they're not. We don't make the market, we interpret the market as an agent. A number of times people accuse us of, you only want to sell my property at the cheapest possible price, where did you get your price from? When we're in the market every day, we know what sells, what doesn't. We know how to present properties and how not to. We get accused of all sorts of things, but we are just an interpreter of the market. And my final piece of advice really is, would you ask your doctor, dentist, or lawyer for advice and ignore him? So please don't ignore us. Thank you very much. I hope that was helpful. Happy to take any questions briefly, or I'm running out of time, but as I said, I'll be over there with two of our ladies, and I think you know us already. If there's any particular things, give me a shout.
No questions?
Thank you, everybody.
Any questions?
They know everything already.
Thorough.
If you want a private consultation outside.